Some of my favorite product leaders, I need to write more about this because there is a product strategy that I think is underused by most companies, and that is to assign the same problem to multiple teams.
Welcome to a new episode of Product Directions Podcast, 100 Product Strategies. We are your insider access to top product leaders shaping the strategy of the most diverse industries today. I'm your host, Nacho Basino, and I'll be digging into the real-life situations, problems, and frameworks used for strategy with product people all around the world in all kinds of products and markets. While there is no recipe for success, listening to others' experiences may give you the edge you need to solve your next strategic challenge. Hello, everyone. Welcome to a new episode. Today, I'm really glad because I'm with none other than Marty Cagan. Marty, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks very much, Nacho. Thanks for inviting me.
I will assume very confidently that everyone listening to this already know who you are. So maybe a more interesting question that asks you for a brief introduction. I will ask you about what you have been doing lately. There's a new book coming out. Can you talk about some of the things you have been doing in the past few months?
Yeah, at a high level, I've been doing the same thing for quite a while. Silicon Valley Product Group has been going now for more than 20 years, and it's fantastic. We're just really glad that that's been such a great, fun thing to do. Specifically, though, this has been a pretty interesting year, pretty fun year, actually. The two big things really have been, writing a book. I think you know this. It's a lot of work. In fact, you pretty much have to dedicate a year of your life. The first book I did took me 3 years of my life, but I was figuring out how to do things then. But now I've done 4 books, and so I can do it in a year. But that's a long time, right? A year of your life on something. And that's been the dominant thing this year. But the other really interesting thing is that this is more of just a passion project for one of our partners, Christian Idioti. You may know Christian, but he was raised in Nigeria, and he really has always wanted to give back. And so he's been spearheading an effort to really develop the product community in Africa. And he ran, and all the partners came with him to Africa to do this. There were more than 1,000 people from all across Africa, and they were amazing. It was one of the most inspirational trips of my life. I met so many amazing product people that the intelligence and the ambition, the creativity is just off the charts. I loved it. We're already planning to go back. And he's in fact there right now, scouting out more groups and teams around the continent. So that's been a really fun initiative, is to try to bring the practices to a wide open, amazing, part of the world.
That's amazing. And I know it's much appreciated. I'm a bit connected to some of the product tank organizers in Africa, and there were some touches with Christian, really appreciated by the community, of course. Moving to the topic I want to discuss with you today, of course, will be around product strategy, which is the focus of the podcast in general. And I feel I have a big responsibility because I've been collecting a lot of challenges that product leaders share among these past couple of years. And I want to do a good job of trying to get some tips from you on those topics. But maybe to start with an easier landing into the topic, I love one remark you have in Empowered, because I think it's pretty close to my own experience or what I have seen. You said, remarkably, most product organizations you met don't even have a product strategy. And the question I want to start with is, why do you believe this is the case? Why do you believe that so many product leaders are not formulating it, or so many companies are not paying attention to that?
Well, this could take us an entire hour to really talk about.
Maybe it's not a starting question, right?
This is not a small question. What I would argue, though, is it's true that most companies do not have a product strategy. And by the way, it's for the same reason that most companies don't do product discovery. Same reason.
Interesting.
And it's not an accident. You'll see they kind of go together. But what's going on is in most companies, they're, you can call them different things. I like to refer to them as they're running one of the older models, the project model, stakeholder driven model, whatever you want to call it. It goes by lots of names. But the bottom line is the company has fixed amount of resources, certain number of developers, boils down to a certain number of developers, never enough. So then they have to decide what to do with those developers. Fundamentally, that's the job of strategy, is to decide what are we going to work on, right? Fundamentally, what are we going to do and not do? Well, the way most companies do that is they have a series of stakeholders, and at the very top level of the company, they make a decision around allocation. They might say that this executive gets 10% of the engineers. This executive gets 20% of the engineers. Maybe one is responsible for international, the other one's responsible for finance, whatever. And then each of those stakeholders has needs, very real needs too. They are trying to run their part of the business to do their responsibility. And so they need a tech team to do things for them. So they end up going in this back and forth negotiation to create a roadmap. And those roadmaps are almost always, as you know, the prioritized list of the most important features and projects they think they need. So what I've just described is not crazy or anything. It's just how most companies have worked. But if you think about that, if you double click about that, there's two things that are not really being done there. One is looking holistically across the company at the most important things to do. That's not done, because that's why often the nickname for this lack of a product strategy is the peanut butter product strategy. It just means you're spreading the resources, spreading the engineers thinly across the company. Again, it's not illogical or anything. It just doesn't make what happens is those companies work very hard year after year, quarter after quarter, but they rarely move the needle. And the reason they don't move the needle is because they're trying to do a little bit of everything instead of really focusing on the few things that matter. And that's what product strategy really is, the few things that matter. And so that's why we say, and I don't mean it to be, hyperbole or anything. It's just literally they don't do product strategy in that model the way that an Amazon does product strategy, or a Netflix does product strategy, or a Spotify does product strategy. That's a very different thing. And of course, if you don't do product strategy, if you just come up with these roadmaps and give them to teams, and if those roadmaps, like 99% of them are features and projects, then why do you need product discovery? You've already been handed a solution. So they don't, they go together. You either do discovery and strategy. I mean, you don't have to, but most of the time they go together, or you don't. So, and I think that's why it's not just saying like, oh, these product leaders are not smart or anything like that. The product leaders in a feature team company have a very different job description, and product strategy is not really part of it. They don't understand that, most of them. They think that, of course, they're responsible for strategy, or even worse, they think product managers are responsible for strategy. But mostly you saying that because it's a buzzword. They see this amazing podcast, 100 product strategies. Of course, we're supposed to do product strategy, but they don't actually do product strategy. Not in the sense that it was, what I would argue it was originally meant to mean.
Yeah. And maybe one follow-up question that maybe even harder than the first one in terms of the length. Some of these kind of product leaders, it's not that they don't want to do it, it's that they are kind of, as you said, forced into a job description that is not what they pretend to do. So they read empowered, they want to do strategy, but they are handed these kind of already made decisions by stakeholders. So what's your suggestion in terms of, I won't call it fighting back, but you know what I mean, kind of going back and saying, hey, we may need to be a bit more focused on the topics we select?
Well, so I wouldn't phrase it as fighting back because some of them do that. And, that usually doesn't go well. If a product leader goes against a senior vice president or a CEO, they almost always lose.
Yes.
So I don't encourage that. However, a lot of product leaders do not realize how much ability they have to impact this way of working. And honestly, in many companies, now I hesitate to say this too loudly because it really depends on the people in the company. But in many of these companies working like we've been talking about, the product leaders blame it on the CEO. It's not the CEO's fault. When I talk to these CEOs, they're like, look, this is how they think we're supposed to run. So they think this is right. And I don't know any different most of the time. So I'm not saying we have to run this way. It's like that's all they seem to want to do. They're saying, we need a roadmap, we need this and that. And so I would argue in many cases, it's not because the company forces them to do that. It's because nobody is stepping up and showing them that there is a better way. And you can even do this as an individual contributor, like a product manager or a tech lead. But as a product leader, you can definitely do this. You can show your company what you could do as an alternative. And the irony of this is, think about this. The product leader, who's probably got a technical background or is going to people like a chief financial officer or a chief revenue officer and saying, what do you think about us actually trying to deliver business outcomes instead of just a bunch of features? Do you know many executives that don't like that? Of course, that's their language. That's they're answering to shareholders. They're answering to their board. So that's what they want. They don't necessarily know how to do that, but that's what they want. If they have a product leader that steps up and says, I can raise the skills of my organization and start demonstrating our ability to produce outcomes.
Yeah.
I've never seen a situation where a leader does that and the company didn't appreciate that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And actually that goes in the direction of the one of the first challenges I want to explore with you, because what I have seen is that, going back to Empowered, in the insights chapter, you mentioned how difficult it is to get these insights. And one of the topics most leaders face is that, especially in big corporations or a bit larger organizations, they face too many options. So going back to the roadmaps, they are being requested too many topics from different stakeholders, and all are potentially valid options. So maybe to make it a bit more concrete, how do you suggest navigating this multitude of options or multitude of potential insights to uncover which are the most powerful ones?
Well, this is now getting to really what good strategy really is. And, one of the quotes I love to use with CEOs especially is the very famous Steve Jobs quote, which is, focus is not saying no to bad ideas. Focus is saying no to hundreds of other good ideas. And I have lots of examples with that. I show that. I explained, look what Jeff Bezos did at Amazon here. Look what he said no to so that he could say yes on the big things. And look at how that pays off. We have examples of that in every good product company. And so there's every company, no matter what their size, they always have many more things they want to do than they could do, than they can do or should do. Because the real question is, what's going to achieve the outcome they need the fastest, the best chance of that. And so this is a long education, this is a back and forth with the CEO explaining, this is why we need to focus. When we talk about, stop me if I'm getting too detailed, but when I work, I think product strategy is probably the most important topic, even more important than product discovery. And I say that, not lightly, because product strategy is really where you decide what are the opportunities to pursue, what are the threats you have to take most seriously. Even if your terrible at product discovery or don't even do it at all, as long as the money doesn't run out, you might be slow, but you can eventually try to, get there, hopefully. But if the strategy is bad, it almost never works out.
Yeah.
So strategy is hugely important. And when you look at strategy, there's really two big elements. The first one, the product leaders really need to do with the senior leaders of the company. If they try to do this without them, it's that you probably are picking the wrong battle. Mm-hmm. So what this is referring to is like, look, let's talk about a typical growth stage company. One thing they always care about is growth, right? Obviously, if they're not growing, their investors start getting upset. And the other one is often churn, which is like how many customers just try us and they don't like us and they don't stay with us. Those are kind of two of the most important outcomes that most people in the product world can relate to those two. There are lots of other ones too, but those are two big ones. But when we can talk with the CEO about like, what is the big focus this year? Is it growth? Is it churn? Is it something else? The CEO is usually in the best position to decide the answer to that. Now, product will have a lot of opinions on this and a lot of input on this, hopefully. But fundamentally, I like to encourage the product leaders to defer to the senior company leaders on this question. Like, what are the most important outcomes for us to achieve? The second part, but if those decisions are made, then nothing else matters. That's the thing. So it's critical that that's done. Once those decisions are made, that's where the product leaders really show their skill, because now it's about looking. We know identifying the key levers for those decisions, those outcomes. Like, what are the levers? At Amazon, they like to call them inputs, but they're levers that if you can get this to work better, your growth is going to be much better. If you can get this to work better, people will stop churning on your product. Those are the key things. And that's the key of product strategy, these insights. They usually come from the data. They come from talking to our customers. They come from the engineers with new enabling technology. Like, for example, how can generative AI is not an outcome, right? That's not an outcome. You can put it on your website and say, we have AI, but it's not anything. What matters is, can you use it to move one of these levers? That's what really matters. So generative AI is a new enabling technology that in many cases is the key to some great product strategies. But it's not for everything, as you know, and it's also not relevant for everything. But anyway, that's the second part and the beefy part of product strategy, is to identify these insights and then make bets on that. And those bets are really, okay, we know the problem we need to solve. We now know the problem we need to solve. And that is what we give a product team. Instead of throwing these roadmaps of a bunch of features at them, we instead hand them a problem, one or two problems a quarter, usually big problems. These are not little things like fix a bug. These are real problems, like it costs too much for our customers to get started or something like that. So once we give them a problem to solve, that's where product discovery comes into the picture, because then they help to have the skills to solve that problem and achieve the outcome.
I have two questions to what you said. The first one goes back to, so we have the CEO decided this goal and we are looking for the levers. And this is where I see that they usually find many levers, because the CEO says this for the entire company. So the entire company usually is looking for levers, and they are being thrown and say, we need to, for example, we can grow into these 3 different customer segments, or we can expand to this other region, or we can focus on generating this new revenue stream by adding this feature, whatever. But here is where I see them kind of locked into this mindset of, we need to build dozens of business cases, or having some crazy evaluation matrices, and I think that's the key challenge I'm seeing there, because they have the so-called insights and they can back it up with data, but there are so many options that are potentially viable that sometimes tends to be hard to identify these really crux of the strategy.
Yeah, now we're getting into another layer, which is really it's a product discovery layer, which is the role of experimentation, because there are always many ideas.
Yeah.
This is another big difference between a company that understands technology-powered products and the ones that don't. And the ones that don't, they think an idea is all you got to do is put it on a roadmap and you're done. The ones that do understand, no, at best, it's an experiment. And what we'll do is we'll run this experiment and see if this works before we decide to invest in anything serious. And that's, of course, a very different mindset. So with the executives, the main battle to pick is to make sure we narrow this down to a few key outcomes that really are important. And then we have a lot of techniques, but now we're in more of the product teams and the product strategy, and then of course the product teams to go ahead and have a specific set of problems to solve, and then assign those to the teams. One of the favorite techniques today for addressing what you're bringing up, which is, well, okay, great, we have this big focus area, but we've also got too many ideas. And I like I love ideas, but I just don't like them to be locked in on a roadmap. That's one of the dangers of a roadmap. And I much prefer, say, you probably know of Teresa Torres' opportunity solution tree. What this is a good, easy way to get a lot of these approaches out on the table or on a board, virtual or physical, so that people can see, yeah, there are a lot of different ways to solve this problem. Most of them probably won't work. Most of them probably won't. That's why we're not going to go all in on one. But we are going to think about these, and we're going to decide the most likely candidate. And that's what we're going to go after first. If it works, we declare victory and move on to the next. If it doesn't work, we have other approaches we can take.
Yeah. You're touching two topics I want to explore a bit further. The first one is what I would call flight level or granularity of what we define strategy. So how big the problem is, or how detailed the problem you want to approach is.
Okay.
Because what I'm trying to get to, and this is probably going back to my original question, when you are defining a strategy and you're, for example, selecting a new customer group that you want to expand on, probably going back to what I was saying of resource scarcity, you don't have teams to try to explore all simultaneously. So you need to bet on one of those. But again, this goes back to saying we will run several business cases to see what is the most prominent segment in order to bet and define our strategy in that place. So I'm not sure if I'm making this clear.
The only thing I wouldn't do is I wouldn't frame those as business cases.
Exactly. That's my question. So because people run into that, but I want to know what's your take on trying to identify this bet at the strategy level before going to the teams with problems.
Yeah, we're mixing a bunch of things in there: business strategy, product strategy, and assigning work to teams. So we need to sort that out.
Yes.
For example, business strategy, which we really haven't talked about yet, but is very important. But that's an input to the product strategy. Yeah. That's part of the strategic context. Yes. So for example, a very simple example of business strategy is, does our company want to sell internationally or just within our own country? That's a business strategy decision. Another one is very much a business strategy is, how do we want to sell? Do we want to sell through a sales organization? Do we want to sell through reseller channels? Do we want to sell direct? These are, and of course, all of these business strategy decisions have big product implications. Exactly. Right. But that's business strategy. That's and that really is the C-suite. Don't get me wrong. The head of product and the head of technology have some big inputs to that, but that's not their choice. This is really the CEO. The product strategy is meant to, okay, That's the business strategy. How can we make that happen? How can we make it so, make it reality?
Yeah.
That is product strategy. So now we're at a lower level of flight
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
your analogy. We're now closer to the earth, right? And we have to make sure, at one level, a problem is we don't make enough money, right? But
Yeah.
that's not useful. That's a business objective. That's not a problem to solve.
Mm.
At another level, telling somebody to fix a bug is not a problem to solve either, right? We have to right size problems to solve. Those are the bets we're really talking about. And normally those are scoped to product teams. I mean, there's thousands and thousands of common examples of problems to solve, and they're not always even best framed as problems to solve. If it's a company like Netflix, you don't think of it as problem to solve. It's entertainment, or a company that does games. It's not a problem, but
Yeah.
everybody
I know.
hopefully understands when
Yeah.
we say problem. We want to try to meet some need that we're not meeting right now. And the challenge is to meet it in a way that works for the business and works for the customer. That's what makes it
Yeah.
hard. That's what makes
Yeah.
product discovery hard. So once we have decided in our product strategy that, look, there are 4 problems that are very important, that if we can solve them, we will deliver on the outcomes we need. Now the product leaders have to decide, how do you get that work done? Do they give one problem to each of 4 teams? Do they give the same problem to multiple teams? That's actually a very useful approach that not enough companies do. But there's a lot of different ways they
Yeah.
do it. But they have to plan, and they have to be smart about this, because any product leader that assumes that problems this hard are going to be solved right away perfectly the first time has never done
Yeah.
this before.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's why the analogy of placing bets I find so helpful, because it's more like that.
Yeah.
We have very important problems to solve, and we're going to place a series of bets to try to maximize our chance of solving those problems.
Yeah.
That's what product leaders really do. So you can just ask yourself, how many product leaders do you know that do any of this? In a feature team company, they don't do any of this. It's not a job. It really shouldn't even be called product leader. We should use different titles. I think the same is proving true with product managers. A product manager on a real product team versus product manager on a feature team are not the same job. And that's why
Absolutely.
so many people struggle with, they can't even define the job of product manager on a feature team. They come up with all these ridiculous, convoluted explanations that you listen to and you're like, what are they even talking about? That's not even a thing, and it's maybe a project manager. It's
Yeah.
not a
Yeah.
product manager. So anyway, those are
Yeah.
the pieces at the different levels, I would argue. Business strategy, product discovery.
And I love that point, because one of the topics that also I think is challenging, and maybe it goes back to to how the leaders are thinking, is this problem of handling uncertainty in those bets, right? At the end of the day, you are selecting based on, this is the fact, the evidence we have, or the discovery collected experiments that we have to signal that we need to move in this direction, but still it's a bet that you are placing and you're trying to see. So going back to what we were saying before, in terms of especially collaborating with stakeholders, when placing this or when having this uncertainty around outcomes, how do you suggest leaders kind of be on one hand transparent, but on the other hand firm on following their paths and their kind of focus areas?
I think if I'm understanding your question correctly, this is really the question of, okay, you have a product strategy, you have identified some critical problems to solve, you also have business objectives, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because the product strategy, the goal is to get closer to your product vision, but also pay the bills along the way.
Yeah.
So you have to be able to get these short-term wins as well. So assuming that's what you're really asking about, then the product leaders have to use their judgment for when they make a bet. Think about it. First of all, they're looking at the people on the product team and saying, like, do I believe that those people can solve this problem. And I'm not being, that's just reality. We have some teams that are very experienced, that have done this together for a while. They can handle really hard problems. Other ones that are just learning this stuff. And so would you take the hardest problem and give it to the newest team that's never done this before? Probably not.
And can be new technologies as well. It's going to be kind of we
new
are exploring
technology, new data. You can't just give any problem to any team, right? Because teams have areas that they really are knowledgeable about. So you want to match. So there's a lot going in. Another big dimension is how big of an outcome do we really need to achieve? If it's a big improvement, we probably have to take riskier bets. If it's a smaller improvement, we're probably fine with more conservative bets. And so we have this dimension. When you give a team a problem to solve, you also have to tell that team how aggressive you want them to be. That goes by different words. You've probably heard people say, is it a 10x or a 10%? Is it a roof shot or a moon shot? There's lots of ways to describe this. I like to just talk in terms of confidence level. I want you to, do this with, say, a 50% confidence level, like 50-50 chance you'll actually be able to achieve this. If there's something that needs to be very conservative, I'll say, no, you want a 90% confidence level. So pick something you are virtually certain you can do. And on the other hand, with some things, churn is a good example. Sometimes if we don't fix this in the next quarter or two, we're probably out of business. So in that case, a bunch of little optimizations are not going to do anything. What we really need the teams to do is place bigger bets. And yes, that's riskier. And so they really need the techniques to increase their chance of success. So you're looking at all of this. You're looking at the team, the people, you're looking at the data they have, you're looking at the technology they have to use. And of course, their the purview. In other words, what they're in the team topology, what are they responsible for? And you're trying to match this as best you can. Some of my favorite product leaders, I need to write more about this because there is a product strategy that I think is underused by most companies, and that is to assign the same problem to multiple teams. Some people don't like to do that because to them it feels like it's a competition, right? And you're setting up one team against another. But if you think about it, that makes no sense because these are different people with different skills, different data, different technology. So it's not an equal fight. It's not a competition in that way. In fact, it's also not a zero-sum game. When you assign the same problem to multiple teams in a dream ideal world, they both solve it and you get the cumulative effect of the win. Yeah. But the reason you do this is because there's a better chance that at least one of them will solve it.
Yeah. And the way I have seen this is going back to what you were saying, for example, the churn example. You may have one team doing the optimization, one team redoing onboarding, and one other team doing, later stage retention. So that there may be ways for teams to, say, collaborate in achieving or solving the problem.
Right.
I think this may go in the direction of transform, and maybe I want to discuss or ask you about what you mentioned at the beginning about the budget allocation. So usually if you go to traditionally managed companies with the CFO say, I will invest in this much money in this team that will deliver this project. When we are talking about strategy, we sometimes, or product leaders sometimes, may need to argue for investing resources here and there, going back to what we're saying, for a bet or an outcome that is still uncertain. So going back to newer ways to present this strategy or newer ways to discuss with CFO, C-level in general, how do you see this playing out?
Well, I mean, you're describing two things. You're trying to describe a very old conventional model of financial allocation, we often refer to as the project-based model. But you're trying to sort of layer on product strategy on top of that.
Won't work.
It's not likely to work. If you can get the CEO and the CFO to understand what's going on. But this is what's meant by transformation. You're describing a company that I would argue they need to transform in order to meet their objectives.
Yeah.
And that it's not hard to point out to them the consequences of running by projects. It's not hard. Do it all the time, and they understand. And I want to point out most of these. A lot of people blame the finance leaders, but really, they don't like it any better than anybody else. How they are working, they just don't have an alternative. They
Yeah.
don't know an alternative, and so if you show them an alternative that works better, they're often your best ally. So it's not about, and are there techniques to kind of make this a, shortcut? Yeah, you can. The easiest thing, I don't want to not tell you this, but the easiest thing is you go to the CFO and say, look, one difference can help a lot, which is instead of funding projects, how about you fund teams for quarters? And each quarter we can show you the progress on outcomes, and you can decide when you stop funding those teams. That's a very small change from a CFO's perspective, but it's a big change from how we work. So that's just a transition technique.
Yeah. But maybe love it, but going now more on the transformation side, and now that with the new book coming, what's the role that the product leader can play? Because of course transformation requires many more things, but let's say the company is willing to transform, the CEO, the CFO are looking forward and are maybe looking at the product leader as someone who can drive the transformation forward from the product strategy perspective. So what are some of the tools or techniques or ways to show this value of kind of placing bets and funding based on outcomes that leaders can use to help that transformation move forward?
Yeah, well, like I said, the product leaders have much more ability, agency than they realize, much more. So the first thing they can do is they can raise the skills of their people. The way I like to describe it is a delivery team is kind of the lowest. That's just a software factory. A feature team is better than a delivery team. A feature team can do what a delivery team does, but they can do more than that. A product team can do everything a feature team can do and a lot more. So at the very basic level, if that product leader starts by raising the skills of her people so that they can serve as a real product team, an empowered product team, then they can, first of all, at a minimum, they'll do a better job of what they've always done.
Yeah.
At a minimum.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But hopefully what they can start to do is to start showing the rest of the company what they are now capable of. It works much better when a head of product, a CPO or a CTO, they show the company what they are capable of now, rather than saying, if you just all change how you work, we could be so much better. It's the bulk of the changes are in product and technology. So first it starts by raising those skills. And you don't even need to tackle product strategy. I know that's your and my favorite topic, but you don't even need to do that. The truth is, if you just raise the skills of the teams and then you collaborate more closely with the stakeholders, in other words, in this intermediate level, the stakeholders are still deciding the problems to solve. The difference is you're helping them to frame them as problems to solve instead of just features to build. And you are showing them we can deliver those better than you've ever had before. That's real progress for a company. Yeah. Now, it still hasn't addressed the real potential of product strategy because there's still no product strategy there. But you can make a real improvement to your company even without addressing product strategy. But then once you've done that and you've earned the right to go to, to show the CEO, we can do even more. How about we do an experiment with this one business unit? Why don't you let us show you what we can do with the data to really move the needles for that business unit? If it doesn't work, it's a small experiment. We can always go back to what we've always done. But if it does work, Wouldn't you like to have these outcomes we've been talking about? So this is all really under the control of that head of product.
Yeah.
They don't have to be a victim of the way the company's been working.
Yeah.
But it does, the catch-22 that we're not talking about here, which is the real problem in most companies, is not the CEO saying no. It's the head of product knowing how to do this.
Well, actually, that's a great segue to one of the questions I had in mind, which is your take on the role of coaching specifically for product strategy. So I know kind of the way you frame it is more like coaching the product leader in general, but for strategy, have you seen this working? Any thoughts on that?
Well, so yeah, that is the right segue. So let's say you have a product leader that believes that she can really do more, but she has this problem that she's never worked this way before. That's a real problem. You can watch some cool podcasts, you can learn a few ideas, but as everybody knows, it's very different to really do it. I know that I had participated on product strategy for several years before I was actually responsible for product strategy. So I mean, it takes a while to learn any complicated skill. So anyway, if that's the case, if I was lucky enough to work for somebody who was responsible for this and teaching me. So that's what they're supposed to do, right? Teach you how to do these things. But this hypothetical person doesn't have that. So this is where a product leadership coach can make all the difference. But here's where I have to pause for a second. Because it's not that hard to realize that you probably need the help from a product coach. The problem is most of these people, if they need help from a product coach, they don't actually know what to look for in a product coach. If they knew what to look for real, they probably wouldn't need the product coach. And the result is that many of them, just pick the person that they like the best or something. And they don't know how important it is to make sure they are getting a product coach that has really done product strategy at real product companies like we're talking about, not like the project model companies. Really done it. Now, the good news is there are real people out there. Over the last couple of years, my partners and I have been trying to build our network of product coaches, as you know, because you're one of them, Nacho. But we've been building this network because we needed to find more people like this.
Yeah.
And we've always had some, but never enough. And honestly, most of the ones we had were in San Francisco. That doesn't really help if you're in Barcelona or if you're in Munich or if you're in Mumbai. You need product coaches that can really roll up their sleeves with you and come up with something good, help you through that process. Today, we know people like that we believe are good almost everywhere in the world. I mentioned this right at the beginning, but we're developing that network right now in Africa. That's awesome. It's very important to us. We don't have any financial ties with any of them because we just if we tell a company that somebody's good, we want them just to be good. That's all. That's all. We don't want them to think we're just recommending somebody and we get a percentage of money or anything like that. So there's no ties at all. They're just people we believe are good. It takes a while. You have to get to know them. You have to see what other clients think. You have to see what they really believe. And most importantly, though, they have to have the experience.
Mm-hmm.
If they don't have the experience, I don't care how nice they are. I don't care how good they make you feel. Product strategy is probably the perfect example where that is hard. A career coach is almost never going to be able to help you with that.
Yeah. That's what you mean.
Team topology is a similar problem.
I was thinking along the lines of how difficult is for someone experienced to actually help you because product strategy is such a difficult topic and you need to know that much about the company, and you take it to a huge new level, kind of maybe even the wrong person to start with. So very difficult topic. Okay, I'm conscious time. We are reaching the limit here, and I wanted to ask you as a final question, what may be some important or difficult strategy challenge that you have found product leaders are struggling with that we haven't covered in the podcast so far?
Well, I think to your credit, you zeroed in on the most critical, difficult challenges. And so, we covered some complicated topics. I hope people think about those. We did touch on the relationship between product strategy and product discovery. We probably could have talked more about that. They really are partners. Product strategy is to identify the most important problems to solve, and discovery is how we solve those problems. So it's really important to understand how those two work together. One of the things we didn't talk about that probably, here's one that we didn't mention that I can think of. We didn't mention, but is a very important topic, which is, we talk a lot in product discovery about basically user research, about understanding, the problems, understanding whether our solutions work to solve those problems. It's one of my favorite, contributions is user research. Understanding qualitatively is user research. Understanding quantitatively is data analysts or data science. So we need these skills. We've talked about it a little bit in terms of how we use those skills in product discovery. What we didn't talk about is how those skills contribute to product strategy. And because when you're making those decisions of the levers, this is where the other side of user research, the generative side of user research, really is valuable. And so what I try to encourage the user research folks, but really this applies to all the product teams, is when we say a team is empowered, that does not mean that they go figure out the problem they want to work on. That's a common confusion. But if you think about that for a minute, that would just be anarchy, right? Chaos.
Yeah.
So instead, what we tell team empowerment means the problem is assigned to your team, but you are empowered to figure out the best way to solve that. Yeah. That's empowerment. Now, but teams will often say, well, what if when we're solving a problem, we uncover an even bigger opportunity, which happens. I love that, but that happens. And my answer is, that's awesome. That's an input to the next iteration of the product strategy. Yeah. In fact, good product strategies are constantly updating every quarter based on the learnings from what's going on in discovery and delivery. So there is a whole feedback cycle there that we didn't talk about, but is really important.
Luckily, what I can say is that before this episode, my episode with Teresa Torres will be released, and we covered that topic in depth. And one of the interesting parts is kind of, you as a product leader, you also need to be kind of out there with users, because you need to solve a different set of questions to answer the strategic questions or problems that you need to answer in order to give the input to the teams. So yeah, very, very timely the remark. Okay, so that being said, maybe if I may, I want to ask you if you can give us a brief intro or pitch to the new book that is coming. I will receive mine next week, but maybe for those who don't have it yet, what can you tell us about it?
Sure. Well, this book is a little different than the other books. Inspired was really written for product teams and product managers, and it's really all about product discovery. Empowered was written for product leaders, and it's all about how you coach people and also strategic context, product strategy, product vision, team topology. This one's different, and the reason we wrote this one was because the single most common question we get for both books, interestingly, is they read it and they say, I understand, and we already know we need to work like this. We get it. The problem is our company is so far away from how this is described. So they read Inspired and they go, that sounds so nice, but our company will never do it. Or same with Empowered, our company will never do it. And so very often we would literally get the question, is it even possible to change how you work to work like that? They know that I think most people understand that if you're a native product model company, it's a lot easier. If you started, like, the truth is Amazon started working this way when they were born 30 years ago. And Google started working this way when they were, started. It's much easier if you're started, but is it possible to change from what we've been talking about? No real product strategy, no real product managers, all feature teams, all roadmaps, to change to work the way we've been talking about? And our answer has been, well, we've been working with companies for 20 years to change. So yeah, we think it's possible, but it is hard. So we decided that we needed to share what we've learned in a book, because so many people just didn't think it was possible. And so this book is different. This book, instead of talking about the techniques to build products, it talks about the techniques to change how you build products, to move to this way. And what's also different about this book is people won't believe you unless you show them real examples of companies like theirs that did it. And so first of all, we made a rule for ourselves that no examples in the book were going to come out of Silicon Valley companies. Because that's too easy, right? It's too easy. They have a big advantage. We're going to talk only about companies that existed mostly long before the internet, old, big companies, the kind that are all over Europe, the kind that are all over New York, the kind that are all over Brazil. And we're going to use those as the examples. We're going to tell, because we've been working with these companies all over. So the book has 12 case studies of real companies that didn't have any of these skills. They work just like you were talking about. And now they very much have these skills. And we show the reader, we try to show the reader about how good they are because we show them what they've been able to do.
Nice.
What they've been able to invent. So that's what's different about the book. And it's really meant to answer the question, how can we possibly change to this way of working? Too many people out there are too hopeless. They think it's not possible. And, we believe it is possible. We think there's existence proofs for it. But, we're only, if you know us, we're only 5 people, right? So we can't work with very many companies. The books help us to share what we've learned with a lot more than we could ever possibly work with.
Amazing. I think it would be super, super welcome and a very necessary piece of the puzzle that we are struggling with. Marty, this has been wonderful. What can the audience do for you? How can they help you?
If they're interested in learning more, we have a newsletter that shares articles. I just published an article this morning called Transformation Theater. Talks about a lot of the pretend stuff going on around transformation. A lot of people recognize those things. And anybody can sign up for this. All our resources are free and no firewalls of any paywalls or anything. svpg.com. Feel free. And I hope this is useful to people.
Absolutely. Really appreciate it. Thank you for your time today.
All right. Thanks, Nacho. Appreciate it.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of 100 Product Strategies, the podcast by Product Direction. You can also follow us on Twitter, LinkedIn, or Instagram to get access to free weekly content that helps product people upgrade their skills and become more successful. You can access more material, promotional trainings, and be notified of every episode of the show with Product Direction's weekly newsletter. Join thousands of product leaders by registering in productdirection.co.